Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind whipped bitter and dry across the open prairie, and Susanna Hartley was sold for $60 and a jug of rye. Her uncle did not look back. She stood barefoot in front of the trading post, dress torn at the hem, arms crossed tight over her chest. Her fingers trembled, but her face stayed calm. Too calm. The man who paid for her, a stocky rancher with foul breath and a missing front tooth, grabbed her wrist and muttered something about her being useless for birthing, but useful enough. She did not resist. Not until he tried to push her into his wagon like a sack of oats. That was when the tall cowboy stepped between them. "Let her go," the man said, voice low and steady. His hat shadowed his eyes, but the sharpness in his jaw said he meant every word. The rancher squinted. "She's mine." "Paid fair." The cowboy's hand hovered near the revolver on his belt, but he did not draw. "You paid for a lie. That girl is not property. She ain't a girl. She's a woman who can't give no man sons. What's she good for, then?" The cowboy took one step forward. "She's good for living." "That's enough." The rancher might have argued, but one look at the man's eyes, quiet, cold, full of something dangerous, sent him muttering curses as he spat and turned back toward his wagon. The cowboy waited until the dust from the wagon wheels settled. Then he looked at her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, even though her throat felt like grit and glass. "Thank you." He glanced at her bare feet. "You need boots?" "I need 100 things," she said. He gave a soft, dry laugh. "Well, I can help with a few." She hesitated. "Why?" He scratched the back of his neck. "Because I got 5 kids who need someone who knows how to keep things steady. Because I know what it means to lose things you never even had a chance with, and because I do not leave people behind." His name was Callum Carter. He was 35 and widowed for 4 years. His ranch was 5 miles east, past the Cottonwood Creek and tucked in a valley where the wind did not bite so hard. He said she could ride in the wagon with the youngest, Clara, who was 6 and missing a front tooth. Susanna looked at the wagon. Then at the stranger. "I cannot have children," she said plainly. He nodded. "I know. And you still want me to come?" "I do," she blinked. "Why?" "Because you need somewhere to go, and because my kids need someone kind. Kind. It had been a long time since someone called her that." She climbed into the wagon. The drive to the Carter ranch was quiet. Clara kept peeking up at her, curious eyes and wild curls, and Susanna let her hand rest beside the girl's, not quite touching. It had been years since she had been near a child. Callum drove in silence, only speaking when he pointed out a bend in the hills or warned about a rut in the dirt. The land stretched wide around them, golden and raw, dotted with sage and cottonwood. It felt like the edge of the world. By the time the sun tilted west, they reached the ranch. It was not much a crooked barn, a 2-story log house and a chicken coop that looked half-eaten by time, but it was clean. And it smelled like wood smoke and bread. Inside, 4 children stood in a row. Clara ran to join them. "That's Caleb." Callum nodded to the boy with shoulders too square for a 10-year-old. "Cassie's 9, Clyde's 7. You met Clara." Cassie stepped forward. "She gonna stay?" "That's up to her," Callum said. Susanna looked at the children, dust on their cheeks, hope in their eyes, and nodded. "I will." The first night she slept in the room across from the girls, on a cot with a thin quilt. The mattress was firm and smelled like cedar. It was the best sleep she had had in months. The next morning she rose early and helped Cassie braid her hair. She found eggs in the coop and made biscuits with Clara watching close. Clyde asked her to read from an old book of stories, and her voice trembled at first but steadied when she saw the way their faces lit up. Callum watched from the doorway, arms crossed. His eyes were soft, grateful. That afternoon she washed her dress and mended a rip in Caleb's shirt. She did not ask for thanks. She did not expect it. But when Callum passed her a mug of coffee that evening and sat beside her on the porch, she knew he saw it all. "They already like you," he said. She smiled into the steam. "I like them too." He looked at her, really looked. "You are not what he said, that man who tried to take you," she swallowed. "He was my uncle." Callum's jaw tightened. "Family can be cruel," she nodded. "He sold me because I cannot bear children." You do not need to bear children to be a mother, she looked at him. Is that how your wife felt? He was quiet for a long moment. She died after Clara, fever took her fast. I did my best, but I am only one man. You have done more than most would, he gave her a long look. So have you. The days passed steady. She taught Cassie how to sew a straight line. She helped Caleb with fence posts. She sat beside Callum each evening, sipping coffee or peeling apples, the silence between them comfortable. One night, when Clara fell asleep in her lap, Callum leaned close and said, "You are good with them." She brushed a curl from the girl's forehead. "They make it easy." He looked at her hands. "You stay in," her breath caught. "Do you want me to?" His voice dropped. "I do." He reached out and touched her fingers, just lightly, but it was enough. She looked up at him, heart thudding. "I have never been wanted for anything but what I could give. I want you for who you are," he said. She did not answer with words. She leaned forward and kissed him soft and sure, and he kissed her back like he had been waiting a long time. She stayed. And every day after, the children called her Susanna. But in the quiet moments when the lantern flickered low and the porch creaked beneath their feet, Callum would lean close and whisper, "Home." And she would smile, because for the first time in her life she believed it. The fence line buckled in 2 places after the spring thaw, and Callum found the posts leaning like tired men. He set out with Caleb and Clyde at first light, axes over shoulders, while Susanna stayed behind with the girls to boil lye soap and start the washing. The morning air still held the sharpness of late winter, and her breath clouded as she stirred the iron pot. Cassie hauled water without being asked. Clara counted clothespins and sang under her breath, a tune Susanna didn't recognize but listened to anyway. Inside, the house was quiet. She had risen early before the youngest stirred and swept the hearth, careful not to wake anyone. The rhythm of chores came easily now, not because they were simple, but because she knew where things belonged. And more than that, she knew she belonged alongside them. "Susanna," Cassie paused at the back step, hair sticking to her temple. "Do you know how to make ink?" "Not well," Susanna said, rinsing the paddle in the basin. "Why? I want to write to Aunt Lillian, but I used up what we had and Pa said we'd have to wait for Mr. Dobbs to bring more." Susanna wiped her hands. "We could try walnut husks if we can find enough." Cassie's eyes lit up. "Could we look after supper?" "Yes," Susanna said, "we can." That afternoon, she took a pan of honey cornbread out to the boys while they hammered in new rails. Caleb's knuckles were scraped, and Clyde had dust streaked across his brow. They thanked her without looking up the way boys did when trying not to seem too grateful, but she saw the way Caleb passed the last piece to his brother before taking his own. When Callum stepped away from the post and stood beside her, she handed him a tin cup of cool water. "Those 2 argue less when you're around," he said. "They argue exactly the same, you just don't notice it when they're fed," he chuckled. That might be true. She watched him take a long drink, sunlight catching on the stubble along his jaw. He looked older in the daylight, not from age but from where the kind that settled into a man's bones after too many hard winters. "You ever think of leaving this place?" she asked. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "No. Not even once." He glanced toward the hills. "I tried once. Right after Mary passed, took the wagon as far as Cheyenne. Sat outside the depot with Clara on my lap and the others asleep in the back, but I couldn't do it. Felt like I'd be running from something I was meant to hold on to." She nodded. "I understand that. I thought you might." They stood quiet for a while, the sound of hammering picking up again behind them. "I want to plant a garden," she said. He looked at her. "You think the ground's ready? If we clear the stones and break it right, I do. You tell me what you need and I'll haul it from the barn." She hesitated. "I'd like a corner spot near the kitchen window." He smiled, not with his mouth, but in the way his eyes lingered on her. "Then that's where it'll be." That evening, she and Cassie walked the edge of the creek, baskets on their arms. They found husks beneath the black walnut tree and brought them back just as the sun dipped low. Inside, Clara was asleep in the crook of Clyde's arm, and Caleb had stacked kindling by the hearth without being asked. Callum sat at the table, sleeves rolled, whittling something small from a piece of pine. When Susanna entered, he looked up. I started a new latch for the pantry. The old one sticks. She set the basket down. Thank you. His eyes settled on her hands, stained faintly from the husks. You're good at making things last. She sat across from him. I never used to be. You are now. Later, after the house had quieted and the lantern burned low, she stepped outside to feel the wind. It carried the scent of thawing earth and the faintest trace of wood smoke. Callum joined her, arms folded, gaze on the stars. I've been thinking, he said. She turned to him. There's space in the fields for more than just corn. I could build a plot for beans, maybe squash. She tilted her head. You planning to do all that yourself? No, he said. I was hoping you'd help me plan it. She looked out over the land. And what would the children say to that? They'd say you're already part of it. She didn't speak, but she let herself lean against his shoulder, just enough to feel the warmth through his shirt. He didn't move, only let out a slow breath and turned his hand so his fingers brushed hers. I never thought I'd start again, she said. Neither did I. The stars above them were quiet, steady. Behind them, the house creaked as wood settled and a coyote cried distant across the ridge, but there, in the hush between breath and promise, the world felt possible. The first calf of the season came just before dawn, legs tangled and breath shallow. Callum found her collapsed near the far end of the pasture and ran back for the sled and harness. By the time he returned, Susanna already had a blanket over the heifer's back and her hands pressed firm along its flank, whispering to steady the trembling body beneath her palms. You shouldn't be out here in the cold, he said, kneeling beside them. She was trying to stand and couldn't, she answered. I didn't want her alone. He didn't argue. Together they lifted the calf and heaved her into the sled. The mother trailed behind, uneasy but willing. Back at the barn, Susanna fetched warm water while Callum rubbed the calf down with burlap. The old lantern hanging from the beam swung with the wind, casting long shadows across the floor, and the air smelled of hay and birth. Once the calf stood wobbly but upright, Callum leaned against the stall wall and looked at her. You weren't afraid she'd kick. She was scared, Susanna said. Fear doesn't make a creature mean, just unsure. His gaze didn't shift. You always know what to say when something's hurting. She looked at him then, hair pulled back in a loose knot, cheeks red from cold. Maybe because I've been both. He stepped closer, quiet boots on packed dirt. You ever think about staying through summer? Her brows lifted. Am I not already? You are, I just... He cleared his throat. I've been thinking about what stays and what passes. I'd like you to help me lay in seed for the warm months, not just for food, for color. Maybe sweet peas along the fence. Something nice to look at come July. She nodded slowly. I'd like that. Later that morning, while the boys cleared brush near the east pasture and the girls stitched new curtain panels from flour sacks, Susanna stood at the table, reading a folded receipt from the mercantile. Callum had brought it home with a sack of oats and a new tin basin. She traced the handwriting with her fingertip. You didn't mention ordering gingham, she said. I figured you'd want something better than what we patched together. I didn't ask for it, I know, but I saw how you tucked the last of the muslin into Clara's quilt. You give away what you need. She folded the receipt neatly and set it aside. I don't know how to get used to being thought of. You don't have to get used to it, just let it be true. That night after supper, she sat in the girls' room, showing Clara how to piece scraps into a doll's blanket. Cassie watched from her bunk, eyes sleepy but steady. Did you ever have a doll growing up? Cassie asked. No, Susanna said, tying off a thread. But I saw one once in a window. It had a calico dress and hair made of yarn. I remember thinking it must be nice to have something that didn't get taken. Cassie slid off the bed and sat beside her. Do you think this one will last? Susanna looked at the small bundle in Clara's arms. If you care for it, yes. Cassie leaned her head against Susanna's shoulder. I'm glad you came. The room smelled faintly of lavender and lamp oil. She didn't speak, only let the warmth of the child's closeness settle into her. By the time she stepped out into the main room, the fire had burned low. Callum was at the table, carving something small from a block of cedar. His hands were steady, his focus quiet. "What is it?" she asked, stepping close. He held it up. "A charm of sorts carved in the shape of a swallow in flight. For your garden," he said. "I thought you might tie it to the fence. Keep watch over things." She reached for it, fingers brushing against his. The wood was sanded smooth. "I've never had anything like this," she said. "It's just a little thing." "It's not." He stood slowly, his chair scraping back. "I never asked what you want for yourself. Not just here with the work and the children, but beyond it." "I don't know yet," she said, "but I want to figure it out with you." He stepped close, hands still holding hers. "You don't have to give me an answer tonight." "I already have," she said. He kissed her then, the lantern casting soft flickers behind them. The house settled into its nightly hush. When they parted, she rested her forehead lightly against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm beneath. Outside, the wind had shifted. The snow in the eaves began to drip slow and sure. The thaw was coming, and with it, a season neither of them had dared hope for before. But now they would step into it together. The rains came slow that year, soft in the mornings, heavier by dusk, and the valley took to it like a thirsty child. Earth darkened rich and clean, and the creek ran fuller, washing away winter's hush. Susanna stood barefoot where the garden rose would be, skirt hitched above her ankles, turning the soil with a hoe Callum had repaired the week before. The rich scent of wet dirt rose around her, and a robin called from the fence line. Clara sat nearby, threading a string of old buttons. Her tongue peeked from the corner of her mouth in concentration. "I think I'll name this row for Cassie," Susanna said, tamping down a clump with her heel. "She asked for marigolds." Clara looked up. "Will mine have peas? If you help me weed it, yes." She returned to the row, hands sunk deep in the warm soil. She didn't speak of the ache in her back or the way her shoulders pulled tight. By evening there was a satisfaction in the labor, in the way her body moved with purpose now. She had once feared quiet days like these, when there was no chaos to distract her from memory. Now she cherished them. Later, Callum returned from the East Ridge with Caleb, both of them damp around the collars. They had gone out to check the fencing near the hollow, where elk sometimes nosed through the wire when the rains softened the ground. Susanna met them at the porch, handing them each a dry cloth and a slice of oat bread wrapped in linen. "Creek's risen nearly 2 hand spans since Tuesday," Callum said, wiping his palms. "Will it flood? Not yet. But we'll haul the woodpile higher tomorrow, just in case." She followed him into the kitchen, where Cassie and Clyde had set out supper and Clara had stacked the button string in a neat coil beside the hearth. The room was warm with the scent of root stew and fried salt pork, and the window panes fogged with steam. After the children bedded down, Susanna stepped out to the porch and found Callum oiling the hinges on the screen door. He worked slow, careful not to let the oil drip where it shouldn't. "I didn't expect the rain to last this long," she said. "It's been a hungry spring in the past," he answered. "This one feels generous." She leaned on the porch post, arms crossed. "Cassie said she heard a whippoorwill near the barn. That's a good sign." She looked at him, the way his shirt still clung to his back from the work, the lines around his eyes deepening as he smiled. "I've been thinking about the room off the kitchen," she said. "What about it? If we cleared the storage, it could be a place the children use for their lessons. That corner gets the morning light." He set down the oil can. "You'd teach them, if you'd want me to." He stepped nearer. "They'd be lucky," she hesitated. "I haven't had much schooling myself, only what I picked up reading by firelight. That's more than most around here, and it's not about what you know, it's how you give it." She met his eyes. "I'd like to give them something steady. You already do." The screen door creaked behind them, Caleb's voice low and urgent. "Pa," Callum turned. "Everything all right? There's a man riding up the road. Looks like he came from the West Pass." Callum stepped inside, pulling his coat from the peg. "Stay with your sisters," Susanna followed. "Should I get the rifle?" "No need yet," he said. "Just keep them in the back room." From behind the curtain, she watched as Callum met the rider halfway. The man wore a slicker hat pulled low and his horse was flecked with mud. They spoke for a time too quiet for her to hear, but when Callum returned, his mouth was set in a hard line. "Who was it?" she asked as he hung his coat again. "Courier from Evanston, said there's been trouble upriver. A homestead burned, they're warning folks to keep watch." She folded her arms. "Do you think it'll come this way?" He shook his head. "Doubt it. Too far and nothing here worth taking unless they're desperate." She stepped closer. "Do you want me to start packing stores?" "Not yet. But we'll keep lamps trimmed and matches close, just for a while." He touched her elbow, a brief, grounding gesture. "We've made something here," he said. "We'll protect it." She nodded, heart tight in her chest but steady. "We won't let anyone take it." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat at the table by the kitchen, mending a cuff by lantern light. Callum came in quiet, barefoot, and poured himself a cup of water. He stood beside her a moment, then reached into his pocket. "I meant to give you this earlier," he said, placing something in her palm. A small coin, old and worn, with an eagle etched faintly on one side. "My father gave it to me when I was Caleb's age. Said it was for luck, but I think he just wanted me to have something that felt like his." She closed her fingers around it. "Why now?" "Because you've made this place feel more like home than it ever did before." She looked up at him, eyes wet but unblinking. "You've given me more than I ever had the right to hope for." "You deserve it," he said. "All of it?" And in the hush that followed, no fear lingered, only the quiet certainty of two people who had walked through fire and found something worth holding. They stood close, the lamp between them casting soft gold across the table. Outside, the rain had stopped. The earth breathed deep. And nothing had been taken. Not this time. The lilacs bloomed the first week of June, thick and wild behind the barn where no one had planted them. Susanna found them while gathering laundry from the line, their scent carried on a breeze warm enough to dry linens in half a day. She clipped a few sprigs and set them in the chipped blue vase by the window, where the morning light caught their color. Cassie paused at the sight. "They look like something from a church window," Susanna nodded. "They do." In the weeks since the rider's warning, no further news had come. Whatever trouble had stirred upriver hadn't reached the valley. Callum had kept the rifle cleaned and tucked behind the kitchen door, but it stayed untouched. The children returned to their usual rhythms, and Susanna, too, stopped checking the window each time a bird startled from the trees. The garden had taken root. Beans pushed up first, followed by thin rows of lettuce and the curls of squash vines. The peas Clara had planted came up crooked, but they came up, and that mattered more. Callum had built a trellis for them from spare cedar rails and anchored it deep, so the wind wouldn't tip it. One evening, as the sky turned amber, Susanna sat on the porch with her mending basket, watching as Callum brought in the last of the tools from the field. He moved with the calm assurance of a man who understood his land, not just as something to work, but something to listen to. He set the spade and rake by the wall and joined her. "You've been quiet today." "I was thinking about the cellar," she said. "If we're going to store more this year, we'll need more shelves. The ones on the south wall are sagging. I'll cut boards for them tomorrow." She threaded her needle through a worn cuff. "I never thought I'd be planning root storage with someone." He leaned back in the chair beside her, boots crossed at the ankle. "Never thought I'd be fixing shelves for someone who notices when the light's just right in a room." Silence settled between them, not heavy but full. The kind of silence that didn't need filling. He shifted after a moment. "I've been thinking about the preacher." She looked up. "He comes through once a month now, stays 2 nights at the miller's place, then moves on. He'll be back next week." She set the mending in her lap, careful to keep the thread from tangling. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" He met her eyes, steady. "I've never asked you proper, never made anything official. I didn't want you to feel like it was expected, but I want it." "I want you." She folded the cloth and set it aside. "I didn't think I'd ever belong anywhere, and now I do, not just here, with you. I'd like the children to see it, to know it's real, not just understood." She nodded. "Then let's call on the preacher." "If you're certain." I was certain the day you stepped off that wagon with Clara in your lap and didn't look back. That night, they told the children. Caleb's face cracked into a grin he tried to hide, and Cassie clapped her hands once before covering her mouth. Clyde asked if that meant Susanna would stay forever, and Clara, half asleep with her head tucked against Susanna's side, murmured, "She already does." They married the following Sunday under the cottonwood near the back pasture, the one that leaned slightly east, as if always listening. The preacher's voice was hoarse from dust, but kind. Caleb stood beside Callum, tall and proud, and Cassie held Susanna's bouquet of lilac and sage. The boys wore clean shirts, and the girls had new ribbons sewn from scraps of the gingham Callum had ordered weeks before. There were no guests but the children, the preacher, and the wind. And that was enough. Afterward, they ate oat cakes and smoked trout on the long table Callum had built the winter before. Clara held Susanna's hand throughout the meal, sticky with honey, and Clyde told a long-winded story about a raccoon that had gotten into the henhouse last fall. When the sun dipped low and the children drifted inside, Callum and Susanna lingered at the edge of the yard. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, brushing her fingers along the sleeve of his shirt. "I wanted to. You deserve to be chosen. I've never been anyone's first choice. You are now." She looked at him, the man who had stepped between her and a wagon all those months ago, who had built gardens and trellises and trust with the same hands. "I love you." He touched her cheek, rough thumb gentle. "I love you, and I will for the rest of my days." They stood there as the last of the light faded, arms around each other, the land around them quiet and wide. Years passed. The garden grew each season, with new rows added in careful curves. Susanna taught the children their letters at the table in the old storeroom, now bright with paper and chalk. Cassie took to drawing, and Caleb built a forge behind the barn. Clara outgrew her button strings but kept them in a box under her bed, and Clyde learned to whistle every bird call in the valley. Callum and Susanna never left the ranch. They didn't need to. Everything they had built was there: the work, the laughter, the long silences on the porch. They grew older but not apart. Each wrinkle around her mouth was matched by one near his eyes, and each night they lay in the same bed, warm and still, no longer waiting for something to come or go. They had already found it, and they kept it.